Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist at Nutrient Ag Solutions, and I want to thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. I want to begin with one of my favorite maps here. And we're going to keep the beginning of this video here talking about big picture things and also longer term forecasts. Then we'll get into some of the near term stuff in a few moments. So we're going to start off here first with the National Phenology Network's Spring Leaf Index Anomaly Map. And this is one of my favorite maps to show in the spring because combining temperature data with basically the color of leaves across the United States, we can kind of get an idea on how spring is progressing compared to normal. We can see that throughout the Carolinas, we're sitting somewhere between 15 to 20 days early on our spring so far this year. In fact, that seems to be the case throughout much of the South and Southeast. It was certainly the case over the last 7 days. And take a look at this map. This shows us just over the last week what our temperatures have looked like compared to normal. And you can almost divide the country right here with where we had the much above average temperatures to the southeast and the much colder than average temperatures coming out of the Canadian prairies. Now, later in this video, we're going to be talking a lot about changes happening in Alaska. And I want you to pay close attention to see if the temperatures change over what they've been over the last week. And this could affect how systems are coming into California, how the cold air has been coming into the north central part of the United States, and the storm track that has resulted from this, which has been running straight here from Texas all the way to the northeast. And because of that storm track, take a look at the last 7 days of total accumulated precipitation. Parts of the central United States, parts of the Ohio Valley have been extremely wet. California has been making up for some major snowfall and precipitation deficits it built up earlier in the year. Although it's only about halfway there, it's still a major improvement. But because these systems keep pulling in that direction, you can see that parts of North Carolina, well, the models have been over-predicting precipitation. We've talked about that now for 2 weeks. Over-predicting on the precipitation and then under-delivering. And that shows up here in our last 30 days of precipitation here expressed as a percent of normal. We can actually see parts of North Carolina here are sitting somewhere between 50 and 80% of average on precipitation. Now, east of the Rocky Mountains, there's only a few places that are dry, and that would be here, down here along the coast in North Carolina. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward in this forecast, because I want to show you first, I told you long term first, I want to show you this. This is the April 2020 outlook from the European model. Now, this was just released on Friday, so I had the weekend to kind of take a look at it and understand this pattern overall. I think what is largely driving the precipitation pattern you see over there on the left is the strength of the subtropical jet stream. All right. If it continues to follow the trajectory that you see here, that will keep parts of the South and potentially North Carolina on the wetter side of things. Now, this also requires that the global winds slow down. We bunch up the North Pacific branch of the jet stream such that we can get the precipitation pattern you see here. But that is certainly one that's going to keep us on our warmer spring overall, which means any shot at some cooler air is going to be just that, just a shot of it. Now, let's do a little bit of comparing and contrasting with the new spring outlook from NOAA. Now, this was released on Friday as well. Now, unlike the map I just showed you, this is valid for April, May, and June. And it's a very interesting precipitation pattern that is being established here. Notice how dry things are out west, and notice how wet they are in the central part of the United States, specifically parts of the Corn Belt there, the eastern Corn Belt, and that extends over North Carolina. Now, when thinking about this, I thought you would like to know where they're getting this forecast. A lot of it is coming from a blend of 7 different models that are run in the United States that give us something called the National Multi-Model Ensemble. And you can see the drier conditions it has through here with the wetter conditions stretching in through this area. Now, to understand how well these models perform, I want you to see this. How did it do a year ago? The map in the upper left was the March forecast for April, May, and June. And what's in the upper right is how things turned out. Now, it wasn't as though the model screwed this up and said, oh, it's not going to rain. But did the model pick up on the fact that, well, a big section of the country is going to have its wettest spring on record? No, but it at least hinted at the wetter than average conditions. Did it get the pattern right? No, it honestly didn't. It would have called for North Carolina to have a very wet spring last spring. And you can see that as you go farther to the east over here on the map that shows us the verification on the right, that it was drier in places. So overall, what's the performance characteristic on a long-range forecast? This is a 3-month forecast. Well, it's about 40%, and that's the number you see right down here. So 4 out of 10 times, it matches this pattern relatively well. It's not as though it was a disaster, but it did a pretty good job last year. But left a lot on the table to be desired in terms of performance. So what about the European model? I showed you its April forecast. What is its April, May, and June forecast? Well, unlike the 7 models run in the United States, which kept this whole area wet, if I pull that air off there, you see that the European model wants to just keep that subtropical branch of the jet stream going. And that would keep parts of the south and southeast on the wetter side of things and give North Carolina a much closer to average precipitation pattern through early spring. They do agree on the dryness in the northwest, though, just to kind of show you some consistency here. Well, let's talk temperatures now. This is the spring outlook from NOAA, again, released on Friday. And it says, hey, stay on your warmer path. I'm going to tell you, in the next 15 days, we might get some cooler weather in finally. But overall, this is a much longer term forecast to April through June. Now, does the European model match that? Not exactly. This is kind of interesting. The European model at this point is trying to keep more ridging out west, hence the warmer than average conditions here, with giving us a much more normal spring. So I guess what I'm saying here is these longer term models, which no, they don't have the performance characteristics we'd want, appears that we're maybe leaning more toward a more normal spring when you look at the European model, and a wetter and warmer spring if you look at the 7 models run in the United States. So we need to compare and contrast these and keep a close eye on them as we progress forward. And I thought you just would like to see what the differences would be in these models as we look out longer term. Now, let's put the longer term aside now and talk shorter term. We still have a very active pattern moving across the United States. And you can see that over the next week, which is the map that you're looking at here, we're going to continue to keep this corridor on the wetter side of things. Bit of a change up coming in the North Pacific, though, which is going to change the weather patterns across the west. And yes, that will translate over us in the east as we get into week 2. But let's take a closer look here at what's happening over North Carolina. You see, the models right now through next Monday are picking up on that same west to east gradient in precipitation amounts, with coastal North Carolina seeing a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, and as you go farther to the west, amounts pick up to the 1.5 inches to up to 2 inch range. Now the question is, are we to continue on that overestimation from the European model? And in this particular case, I don't think that we will. And here's the reason why. We're watching today a shortwave move through, which is giving us precipitation this morning. We need to be watching the next couple of days after that for this shortwave right here to come sneaking through middle of this week, possibly even giving us a chance for some strong to severe storms. And then you see the trough here and here. These two features are coming together at the end of the week and going to sweep through the mid part of the country, giving us another shot at rain at the end of our weekend. So when we kind of look at all of this, we ask ourselves, where's that pattern going beyond that? Well, this comes back to something I mentioned a few moments ago. This is this weekend, so we can see here's our main anchor to the cold air, and there's the leading trough that cuts through the United States. Now, this is Saturday morning, which means it's going to have to be toward the end of the weekend that it finally gets over here, breaking down the warmer temperatures and finally bringing in our last of 3 chances of precipitation this week. But I want you to be watching longer term what's happening here versus here, okay? And we're going to compare that to what's happening on the other side of the Arctic here in the Alaska over toward the Aleutian Islands area. And here's the reason why. So if this is Saturday, this is now day 10, next Thursday. And what we're noticing is a big ridge developing here. And I want to keep an eye on to the south of that to see if we get some troughing in this area. If we get a ridge here, which I'll put an H in it to represent high, we get a trough to the south of it, I'll put an L in it to represent low, that could be one of the first times all winter and early spring that we might get a shot at a negative North Atlantic oscillation. And you're saying, well, what the heck does that mean? Well, that means cooler weather may actually show up down here in the southeast. Now, cooler weather in April is still quite pleasant, but some cooler than average weather, while all the really cold air stays tucked away up here in Alaska, northern Canada, and the Arctic. This is a pretty critical change in the pattern. We're going to talk about it here in the next few moments, because look at what it might do to week 2. I have the GFS ensemble over here on the left and the European ensemble over here on the right. And what we notice is that during that time period, about the most dominant feature seems to be that subtropical jet stream in both maps here. But I think the critical thing to watch is what's happening here. and what that might do to redirect the trajectory of our storm systems. So this again, week 2 looks drier across much of the lower 48. And what's important about that is if there is some warmer weather in through here, you're going to see a lot of field work trying to get done in through this area, which could be critical given the progress we've made across the south with such wet conditions early this spring. So let's keep an eye on all of this as we get into week 2. What are we dealing with, though, in the near term? Well, late tonight on Monday night, severe weather threat moves through Oklahoma, Arkansas, and parts of Kansas. By Tuesday, it's trying to get over here into Tennessee, and we're going to watch for possibly storms to get over here into Wednesday into North Carolina that could be strong to severe. I'm going to show you those details next. Ready? So what are we dealing with early this morning? Well, this is valid early this morning, right about sunrise. Still dealing with showers, widespread showers in this part of North Carolina. But as we work through the day on Monday, you can see our first system pulling into the northeast. We're going to increase our chances for showers midday through much of the state. So a soggy start to our week. By the time we get into Monday night into Tuesday morning, here's the storms that we were discussing. Can you even see the front? It kind of comes out here and links right back up into the storm system coming through Kansas and Oklahoma. So there's those storms. And what we're going to do is we're going to push into Tuesday afternoon. They're now moving here, such that by Tuesday night, they move into the Appalachian Mountains and then get over toward us here on Wednesday early in the morning. So there's the chance that some of these storms might be quite strong as we work our way into early morning. Although I need to put an asterisk next to that because overnight, air stabilizes such that early morning, this is 6 a.m. on Wednesday, it's just not the best time of day for the atmosphere to destabilize, giving us the threat for really strong to severe storms. So the threat is marginal at best in this area on Wednesday. Now here's the thing. After that system goes through, let me show you here. We're going to go over to the European model. Let's pause it right here. This is now Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon and evening. Now look, after that system moves through, the one I just detailed for you, this is now getting in through the day on Thursday, into the day on Friday, and high pressure tends to dominate for the end of the week, giving us a warmer and drier end of the week than we started off. But as I said, the storm system that was out here in the west finally pulls into the central part of the United States by the beginning of the weekend, and it's going to take till the end of the weekend, Sunday morning and Sunday afternoon, for this finally comes through parts of the Carolinas. So again, we've got the morning rain this morning. We have our next chance coming in late Tuesday into Wednesday morning, a break until we get to this system that comes through on Sunday. And after that, high pressure builds in. Now, what we're going to be watching for next week, and I'm going to tell you, the models are not well resolved on this. You can see that a storm system by next Tuesday starts to pull up out of the Gulf of Mexico. See it right there? So this is next Tuesday, getting into Wednesday morning. And at this point, the operational European model is trying to bring that one through the Carolinas, really soaking us midweek next week. So this is April 1st. Now, again, I don't have a lot of confidence in this forming. We don't have good ensemble support for it, but it is showing up there at that point. So I want you to be watching the forecast this week to see how well the models continue to resolve it. And what's good is next week, I'll talk to you again on Monday, so we'll have a better idea if this is coming through. So with that, let's turn our attention now over to temperatures. Now we start off the week cool and then progress toward warm. So this is the National Digital Forecast Database. We're looking at temperature anomalies. So much of the state today is anywhere between 6 to 15 degrees cooler than average. But watch the changeover once we go from the day on Monday into Tuesday, back to normal. Watch this, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Yep, you have several days in a row where the temperatures could be anywhere between 5 to 15 to 20 degrees above average as we progress through the end of the week. And this is Saturday's departure from normal. And then on Sunday, we get the blast of cooler air that's going to come through, but it's not that cold. Look at this, still 7 to 10 degrees above average with the rain shower chance increasing on Sunday afternoon and evening. Now we get into some stuff we discussed at the beginning. What does the longer term look like? Well, days 5 through 10, so this gets us out to April 2nd, we see overall a warmer pattern continues. But take a look at this. When we look out here, forecast days 12 through 14, that's April 2nd through the 5th. I'm showing you a little different forecasting technique here. This is coming from an analog technique where we're matching past weather forecast patterns with current. We see that at that time, much of this part of the country actually is favoring a slight cool bias. We step back and we say, well, why is that the case? Because we can also see that it's looking relatively dry through this part. And if we look out here longer term, this is now on the left the GFS, on the right the European, and both are suggesting near average to cooler than average weather. What it is, I've kind of put in bullet points up at the top, and you can pause it and look at it if you want the details, but I really want you to know there's some changes in both the North Atlantic and North Pacific. We're stacking up the polar vortex both in the troposphere and stratosphere here. You can see it in both models. And this ridge is forming south of Greenland, and it's the first time I've seen the North Atlantic oscillation go over toward negative in a while. Now, there isn't really too much of a story coming out of the tropics, but I'm going to tell you, we need to keep an eye on our summer forecast by watching if these global winds continue to slow down and if the quasi-biennial oscillation keeps going toward negative. Now, I'm going to explain that again in a few videos that are coming up as to what that means for summer, but right now we're just going to stick to this spring time period here. So that is how the situation pans out for the beginning of April, maybe showing up with a near average to maybe even at times slightly cooler than average weather. We're going to watch that carefully though, okay, because we've had such a warm start to spring. To finish up, I want to point out a few areas internationally just to keep an eye on. Very wet conditions in this part of China. So this is some early spring flooding across some major production areas here, ag production areas in China. Also, down here in parts of Australia as they move into fall, very wet conditions in the southeast and the southwestern part of the continent. And that's critical just because we're talking about some major cropping happening down there now. And I'll finish up with this. We're hearing over the last week or so about the drought pressures hitting Paraná, which is here, and Rio Grande do Sul, which is there. These are two big ag-producing states or provinces in southern Brazil that we need to watch very carefully because they've lowered their total crop estimates for corn and for soybeans, and that's simply because of hot and dry conditions as of late. Well, the map I drew on is the next week's worth of forecast. And in week 2, the models are trying to bring in some precipitation into that area. But we're going to need to watch this carefully. I'm highly skeptical of this. We're going to need to see next week if the 1-week forecast still verifies for that. And the reason why I say that is because the models have been hinting at wetter conditions there for a while and have not produced, okay? Meanwhile, where we grow a lot of the safrinha corn and cotton inside of that oval I just drew here, decent precipitation through the next week, which will be critical for helping that crop germinate and get through its early vegetative stages, okay? With that, we're going to go and wrap up this forecast video. I hope that you found it useful. I hope the longer range stuff at the beginning, we can continue to watch together as those things evolve. But with that, we'll wrap it up here, and I wish you all have a great week, and I'll talk to you again next week. Thank you.